Good morning, I'm Charles Osgood, and this is Sunday Morning. It's only the second week of 2009, and already some of us are experiencing that familiar and unwelcome feeling of guilt. Once again, we find ourselves slipping into our old habits, falling short of all those fine resolutions we had set for ourselves. Now that nagging little voice inside just won't let us alone. Seth Doane will consider guilt and its consequences in our Sunday morning cover story.
New Year's resolutions, they're an annual tradition, but breaking them can be just as routine as making them. The result? January is a very good month for feeling guilty.
Guilt can be debilitating, it can be crippling.
Are we as humans hardwired to feel guilt?
I think we are.
Later on Sunday morning, feeling guilty? Don't feel too guilty about it.
Guilt, as usual, hangs over the landscape of the new year. So many noble resolutions made, so many already broken. Our cover story is reported by Seth Doane.
Guilt. For many, it's the line between asking for dessert or asking for the check, working out or sleeping in, and playtime with the kids versus more time at the office. For others, like Woody Allen in his 1984 film Broadway Danny Rose, guilt is a way of life.
It's very important to be guilty. I'm guilty all the time, and I never did anything.
Any time that one arrives into therapy, if you really look at ourselves as human beings, we're feeling guilty about something.
Gary Solomon, a therapist in Henderson, Nevada, says people come to him because of guilt.
So we're motivated by guilt?
We will make phone calls because of it. We will do things because of it. We will make decisions because of it.
And its roots are in the Garden of Eden, says Solomon, at the very core of Judeo-Christian values.
What's the first thing that happened to Adam and Eve, if one wants to accept that story? Guilt. You shouldn't have eaten that apple, and you're a bad person, and I want you to feel guilty, and you're going to pay the rest of your life for it. Isn't that what we're built on?
While historically guilt can be found in the Bible, individually, according to Dr. Sigmund Freud, it begins between the ages of 3 and 6. That's when we adopt our parents' rules as our own conscience. But not all guilt is created equal. While Woody Allen's neurotic character suffers too much of it, sociopaths, like serial killer Ted Bundy, may have none at all. As for average Americans, we spread the guilt around. According to recent surveys, 1 in 5 of us feels it for not doing enough to help the environment. 1 in 4 of us says friends and family try to make us feel it when we break our diets. And then there's Gary Solomon.
If I'm, for instance, at a bank and I've used a PIN and I've accidentally taken the PIN, if I'm on the road, I'll turn around and come back.
How do you get anything done?
Well, my goal is to not do those kinds of things.
Well, think about it when you feel guilty. It's a way to help correct your behavior.
Dr. Jordan Grafman, a neuroscientist at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, says guilt is good.
It may stop you from doing something that you're currently doing because it turns out that's not helpful and you're going to feel guilty again.
For years now, Grafman and his colleagues have been trying to find the science behind human emotions like guilt. Using fMRI machines or functional magnetic resonance imaging, they monitored brain activity while telling guilt-inducing stories to their subjects.
For example, you might say something like, your dad called you and wanted to see you, but you didn't have time, and then the following morning you hear that he had a stroke.
And then what do you, as a scientist studying the brain, see?
So this is the front of the brain. This is the back of the brain. This is that area in the very anterior part of the frontal lobes that we see activated with guilt.
With picture in hand, Grafman reached a conclusion.
Are we as humans hardwired to feel guilt?
I think we are. I mean, we're hardwired in the sense that we have all the brain regions necessary to experience guilt.
Is the sensation of guilt something that's universal among different races, religions, cultures?
Well, I think the sensation of guilt is universal. What differs is the circumstances in which you feel guilt, and that is quite cultural dependent.
But just how big a role does culture and religion play? To find out, we turn to two communities where guilt is no stranger: Jews and Catholics. Father James Martin is a Jesuit priest in New York City.
Is there a hierarchy in the world of guilt? I think Catholics feel pretty damn guilty. And I feel guilty for saying that.
I was going to say. Is there one thing that Catholics are most guilty about?
I would say that in the confessional, what most men confess are sexual sins. What most women confess are gossip. But, you know, unfortunately, Catholics have gotten into this idea that, you know, a good life is just sort of checking off things that they have not done or things that they have done, rather than thinking about the good life as being a loving person.
The great line is that Catholics feel guilty for things they do, Jews feel guilty for things they don't do.
Writer Ruth Ellenson, whose father is a rabbi, compiled a book of essays about Jewish guilt.
There's not the same hang-ups, I think, from conversations I have with friends who are Catholic. For example, I don't know if there's similar hang-ups about things like sex. You know, the greatest sin a Jewish family can commit is that you have 8 people over for dinner and not enough food for 20. That the guilt becomes slightly different.
I think one of the things Jews and Catholics have in common is a very strong set of expectations.
New York City rabbi Bert Visotsky says that Jewish guilt, like Catholic guilt, begins with a long list of rules.
Jews have a system of commandments. The medieval scholars often counted up 613 commandments. It's a pretty large corpus of do's and don'ts. If you've performed the commandments as you're supposed to, good. If you haven't, then you have some quantum of guilt you have to expiate.
Or instead of getting rid of it, you could simply enjoy the guilt, says Ruth Ellenson. Take, for example, the Jewish dietary law called keeping kosher, which, among other things, prohibits eating shellfish.
You know, when you grow up keeping kosher and you order a shrimp cocktail, it can be a little bit extra delicious, you know, that there's a little bit, you don't have guilt without a little bit of pleasure as well. There's sort of two sides of the coin.
You eat shrimp cocktail now?
Are you trying to get me to admit I eat shrimp cocktail on television in front of my father, the rabbi?
Yes, actually.
You should feel very guilty.
In fact, she says, the best pleasure of all is often a guilty one.
I really think guilt and pleasure are two sides of the same coin, and that when you do indulge in behavior which you know to be wrong, it makes the agony of it a little bit more pleasurable, that you've gone to a place that you know you shouldn't have, and you really enjoy it anyway.
Whether or not you indulge in guilty pleasures, almost all of us get a pang of guilt at some point.
Are there things that you feel guilty about? Oh, all the time.
So being a priest doesn't help.
Well, no, it helps, you know, because I spend a lot of time thinking about the scripture and about Jesus, but I can get angry, I lose my temper, I gossip too sometimes, lots of stuff.
You know, sometimes you wake up at 5 in the morning just feeling awful about yourself, and you can't quite put your finger on what it is you did so bad that you feel so guilty about. But you have those moments. I think people try and find some middle ground where guilt is working for them.
One thing seems clear. Guilt is not just an emotion, it is a human condition.